What if I told you that my own mother destroyed my laboratory to hide a family secret so explosive that it shattered everything I believed about my DNA? What if the inheritance that tore my family apart revealed a lie that had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 30 years? And what if the person I thought was my sister turned out to be a complete stranger whose entire existence was built on one night my mother never wanted anyone to discover? This is the story of how a simple DNA test clause in my father's will exposed the kind of family betrayal that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the people you love most. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 34, and I've spent the last decade decoding the genetics of hope. But the biggest twist I ever discovered wasn't in a DNA strand, it was in my own family. You know, there's something beautiful about DNA. Under a microscope, it looks like a twisted ladder, each rung holding secrets that could cure diseases, unlock mysteries, or reveal truths we never expected. I've dedicated my life to understanding these molecular blueprints, following in the footsteps of the man who taught me that science isn't just about discovery, it's about hope. My father, Dr. Henry Carter, was the kind of geneticist who could explain the most complex cellular processes using everyday objects. I remember being 7 years old, sitting cross-legged on the cold linoleum floor of his home laboratory, surrounded by the gentle hum of centrifuges and the soft blue glow of UV lights. The basement had been converted into what most people would call a mad scientist lair, but to me, it was pure magic. "Emily, come here," Dad would call out, his voice carrying that excitement he got whenever he was about to share something incredible. "I want to show you something that'll blow your mind." He'd crouch down to my level, his graying hair falling across his forehead, those warm brown eyes twinkling with the kind of enthusiasm that made you believe anything was possible. In his hands, he held a clear jar filled with colorful jelly beans, red, blue, green, yellow, purple. "See these jelly beans?" he'd ask, shaking the jar gently. "This is exactly how DNA works. Each color represents a different chemical base, adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. A TGC, just 4 letters that create every living thing on Earth." I'd lean in closer, mesmerized not just by the candy, but by the way his face lit up. Dad had this gift of making the impossible seem simple, the complex feel accessible. He'd pour the jelly beans onto a white lab bench and start arranging them in pairs. "Red goes with blue-green, goes with yellow." He'd explain, his fingers moving with practiced precision. Just like A always pairs with T and G always pairs with C, it's like nature's perfect language, sweetheart. And every person, every animal, every plant, we're all just different sentences written in the same beautiful alphabet. Those moments in the lab weren't just father-daughter bonding time. They were my introduction to a world where mysteries had solutions, where dedication could unlock life's deepest secrets, where one person's curiosity could potentially save thousands of lives. Dad didn't just teach me about genetics. He taught me about purpose. "You know what makes us special, Emily?" he'd ask, carefully placing the last jelly bean pair. "It's not just our DNA. It's what we choose to do with the knowledge we're given. Some people use science to build walls. We use it to build bridges." I carry those words with me every single day. When I'm hunched over my own microscope at the university, analyzing samples from patients with rare genetic disorders, I can still hear his voice encouraging me to keep searching, keep hoping, keep believing that the next breakthrough might be just one test away. The irony isn't lost on me that I became a geneticist specializing in inherited diseases. Every day, I work with families desperate to understand why their children are suffering, why certain conditions seem to skip generations, why genetic lottery tickets can be both blessing and curse. I've seen parents cry tears of relief when we identify a treatable condition, and I've held hands with mothers who've just learned their child carries a mutation that will change everything. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the genetic revelation that would tear my own family apart. You see, Dad passed away 8 months ago. A sudden heart attack at 67, right there in his beloved home lab. We found him slumped over his desk, pen still in hand, working on notes for a research paper he'd never finish. The paramedics said it was quick, that he probably didn't suffer. But I suffered. God, did I suffer. Losing the person who shaped your entire worldview, who believed in your potential, before you even knew you had any, who made science feel like poetry. That kind of loss changes you at a cellular level. It rewrites your emotional DNA in ways that no textbook can prepare you for. The funeral was everything Dad would have wanted. Colleagues from universities across the country came to pay their respects. Former students, now leading researchers themselves, shared stories of how Dr. Henry Carter had influenced their careers. The church was filled with people whose lives he'd touched directly or indirectly through his work. I delivered the eulogy standing at that podium, looking out at a sea of faces that reflected my own grief. I talked about his passion for discovery, his dedication to his family, his belief that science could make the world better. I thought I knew everything there was to know about Henry Carter. I thought his legacy was clear, straightforward, written in the research papers he'd published and the students he'd mentored. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the funeral, everything I believed about my family, about my father, about myself would be called into question. A will reading that should have been a formality became the catalyst for revelations that would make my professional work with genetic mysteries seem simple by comparison. See, when you spend your days studying DNA, you learn that genetics can be unpredictable. Recessive traits can hide for generations before suddenly appearing. Dominant genes can skip around in ways that surprise even experienced researchers. But family genetics, the emotional kind, the kind that involves love and loyalty, and long-buried secrets that's infinitely more complex than anything I'd ever studied in a lab. My mother Sandra had always been the practical one in our family. Where Dad was the dreamer, she was the planner. Where he saw possibilities, she saw potential problems. They balanced each other out in that way that long-married couples do, each compensating for the other's blind spots. My younger sister, Olivia, 5 years my junior, had always been the creative type. While I was following Dad into the sciences, she was pursuing art, photography, social media content creation. We were different, sure, but I always assumed that was just normal sibling variation. Same parents, different interests, nothing unusual about that. But here's what I've learned about family dynamics. Sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't the ones people deliberately hide. Sometimes they're the ones that hide themselves, camouflaged in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to emerge and change everything. I remember thinking, as I drove to the lawyer's office for Dad's will reading, that this would be the final chapter of his story. A neat conclusion to a life well lived. I expected maybe some sentimental bequests, some charitable donations, perhaps a scholarship fund in his name. Standard stuff for a man who'd spent his career trying to make the world better. I had no idea I was about to discover that the real story was just beginning. You know what's fascinating about genetic research? You can spend months analyzing a single sample, running test after test, following every protocol perfectly, and then one day you get a result that doesn't make sense. A result that forces you to question everything you thought you knew. A result that makes you go back and re-examine every assumption. That's exactly what was about to happen to my family. So let me ask you something, and I really want you to think about this. Have you ever had a moment when you realized that the story you've been telling yourself about your life might be completely wrong? When you discovered that the people you trusted most had been keeping secrets that changed everything? Let me know where you're watching from, and if you've ever had a family conflict that changed your world, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's a reminder that the most important discoveries sometimes happen not in laboratories, but in the messy, complicated, beautiful disaster we call family. And trust me, by the time this story is over, you're going to understand exactly why DNA tests should come with warning labels. The day Dad died, I thought I understood grief. I was wrong. Grief isn't just sadness, it's a complete reorganization of your reality. One minute, you're texting someone about weekend plans, and the next minute, they're gone forever, leaving behind nothing but memories and unanswered questions. It was a Tuesday morning in March when I got the call. I was in my lab preparing samples for a new study on Huntington's disease when my phone buzzed. Mom's voice was barely a whisper, broken and raw in a way I'd never heard before. "Emily, you need to come home. It's your father." The drive from the university to my childhood home felt both eternal and instantaneous. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I kept telling myself it was probably another one of his minor health scares. Dad had been dealing with high blood pressure for years. Nothing serious, just something to monitor. But when I pulled into our driveway and saw the ambulance, the police cars, the neighbors standing in small clusters on their front lawns, with that particular look of morbid curiosity, mixed with genuine concern, I knew. Some part of me just knew. I found Mom sitting at our kitchen table, still in her pajamas, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Her face was puffy and red, but she'd stopped crying. That's when you know grief has moved from shock into that numb acceptance phase when the tears stop coming, because your body simply can't produce anymore. "He was in the lab," she said without looking up, "working on that paper about gene therapy for muscular dystrophy." Mrs. Henderson heard me screaming and called 911, but it was too late. The paramedics said it was massive. He wouldn't have suffered. Olivia arrived about an hour later, driving up from Portland, where she'd been doing some freelance photography work. She walked through that front door looking like she'd aged 5 years in the 2-hour drive home. Olivia had always been Daddy's little girl, the one who could make him laugh when research got frustrating, who could convince him to take breaks and actually eat dinner with the family. The three of us sat in that kitchen for hours, not really talking, just existing in the same space where Dad would never exist again. It's strange how death makes ordinary spaces feel foreign. The chair where he always sat to read his morning paper suddenly looked like a museum piece. His coffee mug in the sink became an artifact. Everything he'd touched carried this weight of finality. Planning the funeral gave us something to focus on, a way to channel our grief into action. Dad had been clear about what he wanted: no elaborate ceremony, just a simple service where people could share memories and maybe hopefully feel inspired to continue the work he'd started. The funeral was beautiful in that heartbreaking way that final goodbyes can be. The university chapel was packed. Colleagues from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Stanford, scientists who'd flown across the country just to pay their respects. Former students who were now running their own research programs, all of them carrying forward pieces of Henry Carter's passion and curiosity. I spoke about Dad's dedication to discovery, about how he taught me that science isn't just about finding answers, but about asking better questions. Mom talked about his terrible dad jokes and his habit of conducting imaginary experiments while doing yard work. Olivia shared stories about his attempts to use genetics to explain why her artistic talents seemed to skip every other generation in our family. Everyone laughed at the right moments and cried when they needed to. It felt like the perfect farewell to a man who'd lived his life exactly the way he'd wanted to, surrounded by knowledge, driven by curiosity, confident that his work would outlive him. 3 weeks later, we gathered in the offices of Morrison Blake and Associates for the reading of Dad's will. I expected this to be a formality, maybe slightly awkward, because talking about money always feels uncomfortable when someone's just died, but ultimately straightforward. Mr. Graham, Dad's lawyer for over 20 years, was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who'd handled everything from Dad's research patents to our family's estate planning. He invited us to sit around a polished conference table that reflected the late afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. Mom sat to my right, Olivia to my left. Mr. Graham opened a thick folder and adjusted his reading glasses. Henry was very specific about his wishes. He began, his voice carrying that formal tone lawyers use when they're about to deliver news that might not be well received. He updated this will just 6 months ago, and I want to assure you that he was of completely sound mind when he made these decisions. Already something felt off. Dad had never mentioned updating his will. I glanced at Mom, who was staring at her hands folded in her lap. Olivia was checking her phone, probably posting to her Instagram story about the hardest day ever or some variation of that theme. To my beloved wife Sandra, Mr. Graham continued, I leave our joint savings account currently valued at approximately $180,000, as well as my life insurance policy in the amount of $300,000. This should provide comfortable support and security. Mom nodded. This was expected, reasonable, the kind of provision any loving husband would make for his wife. To my daughter Olivia, I leave my personal effects, including my watch collection, my books, and my photography equipment, along with a trust fund of $75,000 to support her artistic endeavors. Olivia looked up from her phone, her expression unreadable. $75,000 wasn't life-changing money, but it was significant. Enough to fund her creative projects for several years, maybe buy some professional equipment, establish herself more seriously in her field. Then Mr. Graham turned to me, and I swear the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. To my daughter Emily, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes the family home, all laboratory equipment, my research archives, and my investment portfolio currently valued at approximately $3.5 million. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. $3.5 million, the house where I'd grown up, Dad's entire life's work, everything. I stared at Mr. Graham, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Your father left you the bulk of his estate, Emily. The house, the lab, the investments, the ongoing research grants. Everything totals approximately $3.5 million. Mom's head snapped up, her face flushed with something I'd never seen before, raw, undisguised anger. That's impossible. Henry wouldn't do that. There has to be a mistake. I assure you, Mrs. Carter, there's no mistake. Your husband was very clear about his intentions. He felt that Emily would be the best steward of his scientific legacy. Olivia finally spoke, her voice carefully controlled, but with an edge I recognized from our childhood arguments. So, I get $75,000, and Emily gets millions. That seems fair. The sarcasm in her voice could have cut glass. I looked between Mom and Olivia, feeling like I was watching our family fracture in real time. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. We were supposed to grieve together, support each other, honor Dad's memory as a united family. I had no idea, I said quietly. Dad never talked to me about any of this. Of course he didn't, Mom snapped, because he knew it was wrong. Olivia is his daughter too. She deserves her fair share. Mr. Graham cleared his throat uncomfortably. If I may, Henry explained his reasoning to me when he updated the will. He felt that Emily's career in genetics made her the natural choice to continue his research legacy. The money isn't just an inheritance. It's intended to fund ongoing research into rare genetic disorders. So, my daughter's life is worth less because she chose art over science. Mom's voice was rising now, that careful composure she'd maintained since Dad's death finally cracking. Henry always favored Emily. Always. And now, even in death, he's proving that Olivia will never be good enough. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Mom, that's not fair. It's not. I never asked for this. I don't even want it. Don't you dare lie to me, Emily. You've been working toward this your entire life. Following in Daddy's footsteps, being the perfect little scientist, earning his approval while the rest of us got scraps. Olivia was filming everything on her phone now, probably for one of her TikTok stories. Even in crisis, she couldn't stop documenting her life for social media consumption. This is insane, she muttered. Absolutely insane. I felt overwhelmed, guilty, confused, and angry, all at once. This wasn't what I wanted. I'd just lost my father, and now I was losing my family too. Over money, over Dad's final decision that none of us understood. Look, I said, trying to inject some calm into the situation. We can figure this out. I don't need all of this. We can set up some kind of arrangement. Maybe I can fund Olivia's projects directly, or we can establish a family foundation. Mom laughed bitterly. How generous of you, Emily. Throwing us crumbs from your massive inheritance. That's not what I meant, and you know it. What I know is that your father always thought the sun rose and set on you. What I know is that Olivia has been overlooked her entire life. What I know is that this will is evidence of 29 years of favoritism. Olivia stood up abruptly, shoving her phone into her designer handbag. I can't listen to this anymore. Emily, congratulations. You won. You've always been the favorite, and now you have the money to prove it. She walked out of the conference room, her heels clicking against the marble floor, with a finality that made my stomach drop. Through the tall windows, I watched her get into her car and drive away without looking back. Mom gathered her purse and stood to follow. This isn't over, Emily. Olivia deserves better than this, and I'm going to make sure she gets it. Mom, please. Let's just talk about this. We can work something out. She paused at the door and turned back to me. For a moment, I saw a flash of the woman who'd raised me, who'd bandaged my scraped knees and helped me with homework and cheered at my high school graduation. But then, her expression hardened again. It's not about fairness, Emily. It's about loyalty. Your sister needs this money more than you do. She doesn't have a stable career like yours. She doesn't have savings or benefits or tenure-track positions. This inheritance could change her life. And it could change mine too, I said quietly. I could use this money to fund research that might save lives. Isn't that what Dad wanted? What your father wanted was to control us even from the grave. Well, I won't let him, and I won't let you benefit from his favoritism while Olivia suffers. She left me sitting alone in that conference room with Mr. Graham, who was clearly uncomfortable with the family drama he'd just witnessed. He offered some platitudes about how these situations often take time to resolve, how families sometimes need space to process unexpected news. But I could see in his eyes that he knew this was different. This wasn't just shock or grief talking. This was decades of resentment finally finding an outlet. Over the next few days, I tried calling both Mom and Olivia. Mom would answer, but keep conversations short and cold. Olivia stopped answering altogether. Her social media told a different story, though. Suddenly, her posts were all about betrayal and fake family loyalty. Photos of expensive handbags with captions like, "Some people inherit millions, others inherit disappointment." The one that really got to me was a TikTok video she posted 3 days after the will reading. She was sitting in her Portland apartment, perfectly lit and styled, speaking directly to the camera with that practiced influencer sincerity. You know what I've learned about family lately? It's that blood doesn't mean loyalty. It doesn't mean fairness. It doesn't mean the people who claim to love you will actually treat you with respect. Family loyalty is a myth. It's something people say when they want you to accept less than you deserve. The video got thousands of likes and hundreds of comments from followers who didn't know the context, but were ready to support their favorite content creator through whatever drama she was facing. You deserve better, Queen. Blood family is overrated anyway. Cut them off and focus on yourself. I wanted to respond to explain my side, to tell the world that I never asked for this inheritance and would gladly share it. But what was the point? Olivia had already written the narrative, and I was cast as the villain. A week after the will reading, Mom called me, not to reconcile, but to inform me that she'd hired a lawyer to contest Dad's will. You can't be serious, I said. I'm completely serious. This will doesn't reflect Henry's true intentions. He was probably suffering from some kind of cognitive decline when he made these changes. We have grounds to challenge it. Dad was sharp as ever when he died. You know that. His research was groundbreaking right up until the end. Research ability doesn't mean he was thinking clearly about family matters. Emily, you have to understand this inheritance will destroy our family. Is money really more important to you than your relationship with your sister? It felt like emotional blackmail, but maybe she had a point. Maybe Dad's decision was going to tear us apart permanently. Maybe the right thing to do was to fight the will myself, to insist on a more equitable distribution. But then I thought about Dad's words from all those years ago. Some people use science to build walls. We use it to build bridges. This inheritance wasn't just money. It was an opportunity to continue his work to fund research that could help families dealing with genetic disorders to make a difference in the world. Was I supposed to abandon that legacy because it made my family uncomfortable? 3 weeks after Mom hired her lawyer, I got a formal letter informing me that Sandra Carter and Olivia Carter were officially contesting the will. They were claiming undue influence, cognitive impairment, and requesting a full investigation into Dad's mental state during his final months. Reading that letter felt like losing Dad all over again. They were essentially arguing that the man I'd respected and admired my entire life had been mentally incompetent. They were willing to destroy his reputation to get money. That night, I sat in Dad's old lab surrounded by his equipment and research notes, trying to figure out what he would want me to do. Part of me wanted to just give up hand over the money and try to salvage what was left of our family relationships. But another part of me, the part that inherited Dad's stubbornness along with his curiosity, refused to back down. This wasn't just about money. This was about honoring his choices, respecting his wishes, and continuing the work he'd started. I had no idea that Dad had built in a failsafe, a clause in his will that would soon reveal secrets that would make our fight over money seem trivial by comparison. Because sometimes the biggest revelations don't come from laboratory experiments. Sometimes they come from the people you thought you knew better than anyone else in the world. The legal letter was just the beginning. Within days of my family formally contesting Dad's will, my phone became a weapon of psychological warfare. Text messages, voicemails, emails, a constant barrage of guilt manipulation, and demands that I do the right thing. It started with Mom's sister's aunts I barely spoke to except at Christmas and major holidays. Suddenly, they were experts on family loyalty and Dad's true intentions. Aunt Carol called me at work to lecture me about greed. Aunt Patricia sent me a 3-page email about how disappointed Dad would be if he could see what I was doing to the family. Even my elderly grandmother got involved, calling to tell me that nice girls don't put money before family. The most manipulative messages came from extended family members who barely knew Dad but suddenly had strong opinions about his will. Cousins I hadn't seen in years were sliding into my DMs with sob stories about Olivia's struggling art career and how this inheritance could change her life. They painted me as some kind of greedy villain who was stealing from my poor creative sister. But the worst messages came from Olivia herself. Not directly, she was too smart for that. Instead, she orchestrated a campaign through her friends and social media followers. I'd get messages from complete strangers who had seen her posts and felt compelled to tell me what a terrible sister I was. People who knew nothing about our family dynamics were sending me paragraphs about sisterly duty and sharing wealth. One message that particularly got under my skin came from Olivia's best friend, Madison. "I don't even know you, but Olivia is like family to me, and watching her suffer while you hoard millions makes me sick. Your dad would be ashamed of the person you've become." These people had no idea what they were talking about, but their words still stung. When you're grieving and emotionally vulnerable, even criticism from strangers can feel like a knife to the chest. The pressure was relentless. Every day brought new attempts to guilt me into surrendering the inheritance. Old family friends called to check on me, but really to hint that I should be more generous. Even people from Dad's work started reaching out not to offer support, but to suggest that maybe his estate should be divided differently. I tried to focus on my research, to lose myself in the familiar rhythms of laboratory work. Analyzing genetic samples, running PCR tests, writing grant proposals. These things had always been my refuge when life got complicated. But even my professional sanctuary was being invaded. Dr. Alex Chen, my closest colleague and honestly one of the few people I could trust, completely pulled me aside after a department meeting 3 weeks into this family nightmare. "Emily, we need to talk," he said. His usually cheerful demeanor replaced by genuine concern. Alex had been my lab partner since graduate school, and he knew me well enough to see that I was barely holding it together. We grabbed coffee from the faculty lounge and found a quiet corner where we could speak privately. Alex had always been the kind of friend who told you what you needed to hear, Not necessarily what you wanted to hear. He had this way of cutting through emotional chaos to focus on practical realities. "I've been hearing things," he said, stirring his coffee with the kind of deliberate concentration that meant he was choosing his words carefully. "Rumors about your family situation, about legal challenges to your father's will." I sighed. News travels fast in academic circles. "Emily, listen to me. If they file a formal claim and this goes to court, it could delay your research grants for months, maybe years. The university won't release funding for projects that might be tied up in legal disputes. You could lose everything you've worked for." The reality of his words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been so focused on the emotional betrayal of my family's actions that I hadn't fully considered the professional implications. My research into rare genetic disorders was funded through grants that specifically required stable institutional support. If my inheritance became tied up in litigation, the university might pull my funding to avoid any appearance of conflict. "You're telling me that fighting for Dad's wishes could destroy Dad's legacy," I said quietly. "I'm telling you that sometimes the cost of being right is higher than the cost of being wrong. Maybe it's time to consider a settlement." Alex was right to be concerned. My family's legal challenge wasn't just about money, it was threatening to undermine everything I'd worked for professionally. But the thought of giving in to their demands, of essentially validating their claim that Dad was mentally incompetent when he made his final decisions, felt like betraying everything he'd taught me about standing up for what you believe in. I tried to push through the pressure to maintain some sense of normalcy, while lawyers argued about Dad's mental state, and family members continued their guilt campaign. I kept regular hours at the lab, attended faculty meetings, worked on my research proposals. On the surface, I probably looked like someone handling a difficult situation, with grace and professionalism. But inside, I was drowning. The combination of grief, family betrayal, financial pressure, and professional uncertainty was eating away at my ability to function. I wasn't sleeping well. I was barely eating. I'd catch myself staring at Dad's old research notes, wondering what he would do in my situation. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday in late April, one of those spring evenings when campus feels almost magical. Students were out on the quad studying under blooming cherry trees, and there was this sense of renewal and possibility in the air. I'd stayed late at the lab to finish preparing samples for a study on Duchenne muscular dystrophy, the same condition Dad had been researching when he died. I was just packing up my things around 10:30 when my phone buzzed with a security alert from the university's campus safety system. "Security breach detected in Life Sciences Building Lab 204. My lab! My first thought was that someone had probably just set off the motion sensors by walking past the windows. It happened sometimes when maintenance crews worked late, but something about the timing felt wrong. The building should have been completely empty except for security guards. I grabbed my keys and headed back toward the Life Sciences Building, my heart rate picking up with each step. The campus was quieter now, most of the students having retreated to their dorms or apartments. My footsteps echoed against the concrete walkways as I made my way across the quad. The building's main entrance was locked, but my key card still worked. The lobby was dark except for emergency lighting, and I could hear something that made my blood run cold, the sound of glass breaking coming from the direction of my lab. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my phone to call campus security. But when I reached the 2nd floor and saw the light streaming from under my lab door, I knew I couldn't wait for help to arrive. The door to Lab 204 was propped open with a fire extinguisher. Inside, someone was systematically destroying years of my work. I could hear equipment being smashed, papers being torn, the distinctive sound of breaking glass that meant thousands of dollars in research materials were being obliterated. I stepped into the doorway and saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. My mother, the woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with college applications, was in the middle of what could only be described as a rampage. She'd already destroyed my PCR machine, a $15,000 piece of equipment essential for DNA analysis. The floor was covered with broken glass from sample vials, years of carefully preserved genetic material now contaminated and useless. She was holding one of my research notebooks, the one containing 3 years of notes on a potential treatment for Huntington's disease, and she was systematically tearing out pages and throwing them into a metal wastebasket that she'd somehow set on fire. "Mom, what are you doing?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She spun around and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Not just anger, but something darker. Something that looked almost like hatred. "I'm taking back what should never have been yours," she said, her voice eerily calm despite the chaos surrounding her. She was holding a hammer, and I realized she'd been using it to smash my equipment. "You're destroying years of research. You're destroying Dad's work." "Your father's work," she laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This was never your father's work, Emily. This was his obsession, his way of proving he was smarter than everyone else, more important than his own family." She picked up another notebook and threw it into the fire. "Do you know what it's like to live with someone who cares more about dead people's DNA than his living family? Do you know what it's like to watch your husband spend every evening in a basement lab while his wife eats dinner alone?" I started walking slowly toward her, trying to figure out how to de-escalate a situation that had clearly spun completely out of control. "Mom, you're grief-stricken. You're not thinking clearly. Let's just stop this and talk." "Don't you dare psychoanalyze me," she snapped, raising the hammer. "I've been thinking more clearly than I have in 20 years. Ever since that will reading, I've been seeing everything exactly as it is." She gestured around the destroyed lab with the hammer. "This is what your father valued more than us. These machines, these samples, these endless studies that never actually help anyone. He spent our entire marriage caring more about other people's genetic problems than his own family's happiness." I realized she wasn't just destroying my research, she was trying to destroy every trace of Dad's scientific legacy. This wasn't about money or inheritance. This was about decades of resentment finally finding an outlet. "And you," she continued, her voice rising, "you're just like him. Always in the lab, always buried in research, always convinced that what you're doing is more important than the people around you. You think DNA makes you special. You think science makes you better than everyone else." "That's not true, Mom. I love this work because it helps people. Because it can prevent suffering." "It doesn't prevent anything," she screamed, smashing another piece of equipment. "Your father spent 30 years studying genetic diseases, and what did he accomplish? What families did he actually save? What suffering did he actually prevent?" She was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she continued her destruction. "He died alone in this lab, Emily, alone with his precious research while his family was upstairs eating breakfast, not knowing it would be the last time we'd ever see him alive." I pulled out my phone and dialed campus security. I didn't want to call the police on my own mother, but she was clearly in the middle of some kind of breakdown, and she was destroying equipment and research that couldn't be replaced. "This is Dr. Emily Carter in Lab 204. I need security immediately. Someone is destroying my laboratory." She heard me on the phone and laughed again, that same bitter sound. "Go ahead. Call security. Call the police. Show the world what kind of daughter you really are. The kind who has her own mother arrested. The kind who protects her father's legacy from someone having a mental breakdown," I said quietly. That's when she completely lost it. She started screaming words I'd never heard her use before, accusations that cut deeper than any physical violence could have. She called me selfish, greedy, heartless. She said I'd never cared about anyone but myself, that I'd manipulated Dad into favoring me, that I'd stolen Olivia's rightful inheritance through years of calculated manipulation. "You think you're so smart," she said, her voice hoarse from screaming. "You think your DNA makes you special? Makes you worthy of everything while the rest of us get nothing? Well, let me tell you something about DNA, Emily. Let me tell you something about family genetics that might surprise you." Before she could say whatever she was planning to reveal, campus security arrived. 2 guards rushed into the lab, took in the scene of destruction, and immediately called for police backup. Mom dropped the hammer and sat down heavily in my desk chair, suddenly looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. The next few hours were a blur of police reports, insurance claims, and damage assessments. The fire department had to extinguish the burning wastebasket. The hazmat team had to assess whether any dangerous chemicals had been released. The university's risk management department had to document every piece of destroyed equipment. Mom was arrested for breaking and entering destruction of property and arson. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked at me one more time. "This isn't over, Emily. You have no idea what you're really fighting for. You have no idea who you really are." I stood in the ruins of my laboratory until almost dawn trying to process what had just happened. Years of research gone, equipment that would take months to replace destroyed. But worse than the professional setback was the emotional devastation of watching my mother, the woman who taught me to be strong and independent, completely fall apart. Alex found me there the next morning, sitting among the broken glass and scattered papers. He didn't say anything at first, just sat down next to me and surveyed the damage. "I'm going to help you rebuild this," he said finally. "Whatever it takes." "She's sick, Alex. My mom is having some kind of breakdown, and I had her arrested." "You protected yourself and your work. That's what your father would have wanted you to do." But I couldn't shake the feeling that Mom's rampage was about more than grief and resentment. Her final words kept echoing in my mind. "You have no idea who you really are." What did she mean by that? What was she planning to tell me before security arrived? I filed for a restraining order the next day. The university increased security around my lab and provided temporary replacement equipment. The insurance company promised to cover most of the damages, though it would take weeks to process the claims. But I knew this was far from over. Mom's destruction of my lab felt like a declaration of war. She'd escalated this conflict beyond anything I could have imagined, and I had a terrible feeling that her final threat wasn't just the ranting of someone in the middle of a breakdown. She knew something she thought would change everything. And as much as I wanted to dismiss her words as the product of grief and anger, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst revelations were still to come. 2 weeks after Mom's arrest, we were back in Mr. Graham's conference room. But this time, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Mom had been released on bail and was sitting as far away from me as possible, her lawyer whispering instructions in her ear. Olivia was there too, dressed like she was attending a funeral, all black clothes and dark sunglasses that she refused to take off even indoors. I had my own attorney now, Sarah Martinez, a sharp estate litigation specialist who'd come highly recommended. The lab destruction had escalated this beyond family drama into serious legal territory. Criminal charges, insurance claims, restraining orders, this was war, and I needed professional protection. Mr. Graham looked older than when I'd seen him just weeks earlier. The stress of handling our family's implosion was clearly taking its toll. He adjusted his glasses and opened a different folder thicker than the original will documents. Before we proceed with the formal contestation hearing, he began, his voice carrying a weight that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "There's something I need to discuss. A clause in Henry's will that only comes into effect under specific circumstances." Mom's lawyer, a sleek woman in an expensive suit, leaned forward. "What kind of clause?" Mr. Graham cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to reveal. Henry was very specific about this. If his will was ever formally contested, he wanted to ensure that all parties had legitimate legal standing to make claims against his estate. "Get to the point," Mom snapped. "The point, Sandra, is that Henry included a mandatory DNA verification clause. If anyone contests, this will all parties claiming to be his heirs must submit to genetic testing to confirm their biological relationship to the deceased." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. I felt like the temperature in the room had dropped 20 degrees. This was Dad's failsafe, his way of ensuring that his final wishes couldn't be challenged by anyone without legitimate claim to his estate. Mom was the first to react, and her response was volcanic. "That's insane! That's the paranoid delusion of a sick old man. Henry had no right to demand genetic testing. No court would uphold something so invasive." "Actually," Sarah interjected smoothly, Genetic testing in estate disputes is becoming increasingly common, especially when paternity questions arise. If the will specifically includes such a provision, and if you're contesting based on claims of inheritance rights, the court will likely enforce it. Olivia finally spoke, her voice strangely flat. So, we all have to take DNA tests. Only if you wish to proceed with contesting the will, Mr. Graham explained. Emily, as the primary beneficiary, would also need to be tested to confirm her legal standing. But if you choose to drop the contestation, no testing would be required. I watched Mom and Olivia exchange a look that I couldn't quite interpret. There was something in that glance, panic, maybe fear. I'd never seen either of them react this way to a legal proceeding before. This is harassment, Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. Henry is trying to humiliate us even from the grave. The provision exists, Mr. Graham said firmly. Henry was very clear about his reasoning. He told me he wanted to ensure that his estate went only to his legitimate heirs, and that he wanted to prevent any future disputes based on false claims of inheritance. Olivia stood up abruptly. I need some air. She walked out of the conference room, leaving her phone behind on the table. Through the window, I could see her pacing in the hallway, running her hands through her hair in that way she'd done since we were kids whenever she was really stressed. She's upset, Mom said, as if this explained everything. This whole process has been traumatic for her, for all of us. The testing can be done quickly and discreetly, Sarah offered. A simple cheek swab processed at an independent laboratory results in 48 hours. If you want to continue with the contestation, this is a necessary step. Mom's lawyer was typing furiously on her laptop, probably researching legal precedents for challenging genetic testing requirements. But I could see in her body language that she knew this was a battle they couldn't win. We need time to consider our options, Mom said finally. Of course, but I should mention that the court date is set for next month. If you intend to proceed, the testing needs to be completed well before then. Oh, we scheduled the DNA testing for the following week. 3 days at a certified laboratory, all parties tested under legal supervision to ensure chain of custody. It should have been a formality, a simple confirmation of biological relationships that we all already knew. But as we left that conference room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was about to change. Mom and Olivia were acting strange, nervous in a way that went beyond normal anxiety about invasive legal procedures. They kept whispering to each other, stopping conversations when I came near, exchanging those loaded glances that suggested they knew something I didn't. The night before the DNA testing, I called Olivia. We hadn't really talked since the will reading, and I wanted to clear the air before we had to spend a day together at the lab. I know this is weird, I said when she finally answered. Having to prove we're related to Dad. But it's just a formality. Once it's done, maybe we can figure out how to split the inheritance fairly. There was a long pause before she responded. Emily, do you remember when we were kids how Mom used to say I looked so different from you and Dad? You do look different. You have Mom's coloring her bone structure. I look more like Dad. That's just normal genetic variation. Right, normal genetic variation. Her voice sounded hollow. I'll see you tomorrow, Emily. She hung up before I could say anything else. The testing was conducted at GeneTech Labs, a sterile facility downtown that specialized in legal DNA analysis. We sat in separate waiting rooms, each called in individually to provide samples. The technician who swabbed my cheek was professional and efficient, explaining that results would be available within 48 hours and would be sent directly to the court. I expected to feel relief once the testing was done. Instead, I felt a growing sense of dread that I couldn't explain. Dad had included this clause for a reason. He'd anticipated that his will might be contested, and he'd built in this safeguard. But why? What had he suspected that the rest of us didn't know? 2 days later, Mr. Graham called an emergency meeting. His voice on the phone was carefully neutral, but I could hear tension underneath his professional demeanor. The DNA results are in. We need to discuss them immediately before the court hearing. I arrived at his office first, my heart pounding with an anxiety I couldn't rationalize. This was supposed to be a formality. I was Henry Carter's daughter. I'd inherited his love of science, his analytical mind, his stubborn dedication to truth. Of course, the DNA would confirm what we all already knew. Mom and Olivia arrived together, both looking pale and drawn. Mom was clutching a tissue, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. Olivia was back to hiding behind her sunglasses, even though it was overcast outside. Mr. Graham had 3 sealed envelopes on his desk, each labeled with one of our names. He looked like a man who'd rather be anywhere else in the world. I want to preface this by saying that these results were processed by an independent certified laboratory. They've been verified twice to ensure accuracy. And I want you all to know that whatever these results show, we can work together to find a path forward. My stomach dropped. You don't give disclaimers like that before delivering expected news. Emily, he said, opening the first envelope, your DNA confirms that Henry Carter was your biological father. There's no question about your paternity. I felt a wave of relief, but it was immediately followed by confusion. If my results were straightforward, why did Mr. Graham look so uncomfortable? Olivia, he continued, opening the second envelope with obvious reluctance. Your DNA shows that Henry Carter was not your biological father. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Not her biological father. I looked at Olivia, expecting shock, confusion, demands for retesting. Instead, she just sat there, unnaturally still, like she'd been expecting this news. Furthermore, Mr. Graham continued, his voice growing quieter, the genetic analysis shows that Olivia and Emily are not biological sisters. You don't share any significant DNA markers that would indicate a sibling relationship. The room was spinning. Olivia wasn't Dad's daughter. We weren't sisters. Everything I'd believed about my family, about my identity, about the last 29 years of my life was based on a lie. I turned to look at Mom, expecting to see the same shock and confusion that I was feeling. Instead, her face was buried in her hands, and she was sobbing quietly. Mom, I said, my voice sounding strange and far away. Mom, what's going on? She looked up at me, her makeup streaked down her cheeks, her eyes filled with something that looked like shame. It was one night, she whispered. Just one night. I was young and stupid and angry at your father for spending our anniversary in the lab instead of with me. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Mom had cheated on Dad. Olivia was the result of that affair. And somehow Dad had known or suspected, but he'd raised Olivia as his own daughter anyway. Who? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. David Morrison. He was a colleague of your father's. He left the university right after it happened, moved to California. I never told him about Olivia. I never told anyone. Olivia finally spoke, her voice barely audible. You mean my whole life has been a lie? You were loved, Mom said desperately. Henry loved you like his own daughter. He never treated you differently. But he knew, I said, pieces clicking into place. That's why he included the DNA clause. That's why he left everything to me. He knew Olivia wasn't his biological daughter. He suspected, Mom admitted. Near the end, he started asking questions about my pregnancy timeline, about why Olivia looked so different from both of us. I think he'd figured it out. I stared at this woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me about honesty and integrity, who'd just revealed that my entire family history was built on deception. You let us grow up thinking we were sisters. You let Olivia believe Dad was her father. You've been lying to all of us for 29 years. I was protecting our family, she said, but the words sounded hollow. You were protecting yourself, I corrected. You were protecting your image, your reputation, your comfortable life. And when Dad's will threatened to expose your lie, you decided to destroy everything he'd worked for rather than face the truth. Olivia stood up slowly, moving like someone in a dream. I need to leave. I can't be here right now. Olivia, wait. Mom called after her, but she was already walking toward the door. She paused in the doorway and turned back to look at me. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, she took off her sunglasses and I could see tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Emily. I'm sorry I blamed you for something that was never your fault. I'm sorry I let them make you the villain when you were the only one telling the truth." After she left, it was just me and Mom and Mr. Graham in that conference room, surrounded by the wreckage of 3 decades of family lies. Mom was still crying, but now her tears felt manipulative rather than genuine. "This doesn't change anything," she said desperately. "Olivia is still my daughter. She still deserves support." "She deserves the truth," I said quietly. "Something you should have given her 29 years ago." "Emily, please, we can work this out. We can still be a family." I looked at this woman who'd given birth to me, who'd shaped my childhood, who'd just revealed that everything I'd believed about my family was a carefully constructed lie. I felt something inside me break, but it wasn't my heart. It was the last chain connecting me to people who'd never really loved me unconditionally. "You lied to protect your image," I said, standing up to leave. "And when that lie was threatened, you destroyed everything that actually mattered. Dad's research, my lab, Olivia's sense of identity, our family's trust in each other. All to avoid facing the consequences of one night's mistake." "Where are you going?" she called after me. "To build something real, something based on truth instead of lies, something Dad would actually be proud of." As I walked out of that office, I realized that the DNA results hadn't just revealed Olivia's paternity. They'd revealed the fundamental difference between me and the people who'd raised me. I valued truth over comfort, integrity over image, genuine relationships over convenient facades. Dad had known who I really was. That's why he'd left me his legacy. Not because of biology, but because of character. Because he trusted me to honor truth over everything else. And that's exactly what I was going to do. The truth has a way of reshaping everything around it, like dropping a stone into still water. The ripples spread outward, touching parts of your life you never expected, changing landscapes you thought were permanent. In the weeks following the DNA revelation, I watched my entire world reorganize itself around this new reality. Mom's legal troubles came first and fast. The district attorney's office had been building a case against her for the lab destruction, and the DNA results only strengthened their position. Breaking into a university facility, destroying tens of thousands of dollars in equipment and research materials, arson, these weren't the actions of a grieving widow. These were calculated crimes committed by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Her sentencing hearing was held on a gray Tuesday morning in May. I sat in the back of the courtroom watching the woman who'd raised me stand before a judge to answer for destroying my life's work. She looked smaller, somehow diminished in a way that had nothing to do with a standard orange jumpsuit. Her lawyer had tried to negotiate a plea deal based on emotional distress and mental health factors. "My client was suffering from severe grief-related depression," he argued. "The loss of her husband combined with family stress over the inheritance created a perfect storm of psychological instability." But the prosecutor wasn't buying it. "This wasn't a moment of passion, Your Honor. Mrs. Carter planned this attack. She obtained access to a secure university facility, brought tools specifically for destruction, and systematically destroyed years of genetic research. This was calculated revenge, not temporary insanity." The judge sentenced her to 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and full restitution for the damaged equipment and lost research. The restitution alone came to nearly $200,000 money she didn't have, which meant liens against her property and garnished wages for years to come. As court officers processed her paperwork, she looked back at me one final time. I expected to see remorse, maybe an attempt at reconciliation. Instead, her eyes held something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction, as if she'd accomplished exactly what she'd set out to do, regardless of the personal cost. That look told me everything I needed to know about whether our relationship could ever be repaired. Olivia's reaction to the DNA revelations was completely different from Mom's defiant anger. She simply vanished. Her social media accounts went dark overnight, No posts, no stories, no responses to the hundreds of comments and messages from followers who'd been following our family drama like a reality TV show. Her apartment in Portland sat empty. Her friends hadn't heard from her. Even her closest collaborators didn't know where she'd gone. For someone who'd built her entire identity around documenting her life online, this sudden silence was deafening. I was worried enough to file a missing person report, but the police couldn't do much since she was an adult who'd left voluntarily. Her bank account showed regular ATM withdrawals from various locations across the Pacific Northwest, suggesting she was alive and mobile but deliberately staying off the grid. 3 weeks after the DNA results, I got a call from Dr. Alex Chen. We'd been talking more frequently since Mom's attack on my lab, partly because he was helping me rebuild my research program, but also because he was one of the few people who understood both the professional and personal implications of what I was going through. "I think I found Olivia," he said without preamble. "Where? She's in therapy, intensive residential treatment at a facility called Mindful Horizons, about 2 hours north of Seattle. She called me yesterday." I was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "She called you, not me. Emily, you have to understand her entire sense of identity just got shattered. She's probably not ready to face you yet, but she wanted someone to know where she was, and she specifically asked me to tell you that she's safe." It was typical Olivia, I realized. Even in crisis, she was managing her image, controlling the narrative. She didn't want to deal with me directly, but she wanted credit for being responsible enough to let me know she was okay. What did she say? That she needed time to figure out who she is when she's not performing the role of Henry Carter's daughter. That she's been living a lie for 29 years and doesn't know how to be authentic when everything she thought was real turned out to be fake. The pain in Alex's voice told me that Olivia had been more open with him than his summary suggested. There was something about the way he talked about her situation, with genuine empathy rather than clinical detachment, that made me curious about their conversation. "Alex, did you offer to help her financially with the treatment?" A pause. I might have mentioned that there were resources available if she needed them. Resources meaning me. Resources meaning people who care about her well-being regardless of biological relationships. I should have been annoyed that he'd made financial commitments on my behalf without asking. Instead, I felt grateful that someone was looking out for Olivia when I couldn't. The truth was, I did want to help her. Despite everything that had happened, despite the lies and manipulation and family destruction, I still cared about the person I'd grown up believing was my sister. "Set up a trust," I told him. "Enough to cover her treatment and living expenses while she figures things out. But structured payments, not a lump sum. And it comes with conditions. Continued therapy. No social media drama about our family. No contact with Mom while she's working through this." Those are reasonable conditions. They're protective conditions for both of us. Alex became my unofficial liaison with Olivia during her treatment. He'd update me on her progress without sharing details that felt too private, and he'd convey my messages to her when she wasn't ready for direct contact. It was an awkward arrangement, but it worked for where we were emotionally. Through Alex, I learned that Olivia was making genuine progress. She was working with a therapist who specialized in identity reconstruction after major life revelations. She was participating in group therapy with other people who discovered life-changing secrets about their families. Most importantly, she was starting to separate her sense of self-worth from her social media presence. "She's actually relieved in some ways," Alex told me during one of our weekly check-ins. "She always felt like she didn't quite fit in your family, but she thought it was her fault. Finding out about her biological father helps explain feelings she's had her whole life." Meanwhile, I was building something new from the ruins of my old life. Dad's inheritance wasn't just money. It was an opportunity to create the kind of research program he'd always dreamed of, but could never afford on a university salary. I established the Carter Foundation for Genetic Research, dedicating it to studying rare hereditary disorders that affected families like the ones Dad had spent his career trying to help. The Foundation's mission was simple, fund breakthrough research support affected families and ensure that scientific discoveries actually translated into treatments that improved people's lives. The family home became the Foundation's headquarters. I converted Dad's basement lab into a state-of-the-art research facility, upgraded with equipment that he could only have dreamed of owning. The main floor became office space for researchers and support staff. The upper floors remained residential, providing housing for visiting scientists and graduate students. It felt right turning our childhood home into a place where Dad's work could continue and expand. Every room held memories of his passion for discovery, and now those memories were inspiring new generations of researchers to push the boundaries of genetic medicine. The Foundation's first major grant went to a team studying Duchenne muscular dystrophy, the same condition Dad had been researching when he died. Within 6 months, they'd identified a promising gene therapy approach that could potentially slow or stop the disease's progression. It was exactly the kind of breakthrough Dad had spent decades hoping to achieve. But the most meaningful project was one I initiated personally, a comprehensive study of families affected by parental misattribution cases, where genetic testing revealed that biological relationships weren't what families had believed them to be. I wanted to understand not just the genetics involved, but the psychological and social impacts of these discoveries. The research was personal, obviously, but it was also important. As genetic testing became more common and affordable, more families were going to face the kinds of revelations that had torn mine apart. They deserved better resources, better support, better understanding of how to navigate these emotional minefields. Through this research, I connected with dozens of people who'd experienced similar family upheavals. Some stories ended in reconciliation and stronger relationships built on truth rather than assumptions. Others ended in permanent separations that were ultimately healthier for everyone involved. All of them reinforced my belief that honesty, however painful, was always preferable to comfortable lies. Alex became my closest collaborator in all of this. He helped me navigate the legal complexities of setting up a foundation, introduced me to other researchers who shared our mission, and provided the kind of emotional support that made the long days and difficult decisions manageable. Our relationship was evolving in ways that neither of us quite knew how to define. We'd always been close colleagues and friends, but the intensity of working together through my family crisis had created a deeper connection. We'd sit up late in Dad's old lab analyzing research proposals or discussing the Foundation's future direction, and I'd catch myself wondering what it would be like if our partnership extended beyond professional collaboration. But we were both careful not to rush into anything. I was still processing the emotional aftermath of discovering that my entire family history was based on lies. Alex was navigating his own complicated feelings about being caught between me and Olivia, trying to support us both without betraying either one's trust. One evening, in late summer, we were working in the Foundation's main lab when Alex looked up from the grant application he was reviewing. "You know, what's amazing about what you've built here," he said. "What? Your father would be so proud, not just of the research or the Foundation, but of how you've handled everything. You could have let this destroy you. Instead, you used it to become exactly the person he always believed you were." I felt tears starting to form, the first ones I'd shed since the DNA results. Some days I feel like I'm just pretending to be strong, like I'm performing the role of someone who has their life together. "That's called being human," he said gently. "The difference between you and some other people in this situation is that you're pretending to be the person you actually want to become. That's not fake, that's growth." He was right. I was growing, changing, becoming someone I couldn't have imagined being a year ago. The Foundation was giving me purpose beyond my personal research. The painful truth about my family was teaching me to value authentic relationships over convenient ones. Even my relationship with Olivia was evolving into something more honest, if more distant than what we'd had before. By fall, Olivia was ready to leave residential treatment. She'd found an apartment in Eugene, Oregon, and was planning to start college again, this time studying psychology, with a focus on family systems therapy. She wanted to help other people navigate the kind of identity crisis she'd experienced. We had our first real conversation since the DNA results on a cool October afternoon. She called me directly, no Alex as intermediary, ready to talk about our future relationship. "I want you to know that I don't blame you for any of this," she said, her voice sounding clearer and more confident than I'd heard in months. "You were as much a victim of Mom's lies as I was. Maybe more because you've been carrying the guilt of the inheritance while I've been dealing with the identity questions." "I'm sorry too," I told her. "Sorry that Dad's will cause so much pain. Sorry that the truth came out in such a destructive way. Sorry that we lost so much time being angry at each other instead of supporting each other." "Do you think we can be friends?" she asked. "Not sisters, we never really were sisters biologically speaking. But maybe we can be friends who happen to share some complicated family history." It was a mature question, the kind of thoughtful approach to relationships that suggested her therapy had been genuinely helpful. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that very much." We talked for over an hour, sharing thoughts and feelings we'd never been able to express when we were trapped in the roles of competing sisters. Olivia told me about her plans for school, her hopes for eventually working with families in crisis. I told her about the Foundation's research programs and the families we were already helping. Near the end of our conversation, she brought up the trust I'd established for her treatment and education. "I want to earn this," she said. "Not just accept it because you feel guilty about the inheritance. I want to do something meaningful with the support you're giving me." "You already are," I assured her. "You're rebuilding your life based on truth instead of lies. You're planning to help other people navigate similar crises. Dad would be proud of that, even if he wasn't your biological father." "He was my dad in every way that mattered," she said quietly. "DNA doesn't change the bedtime stories he read, or the way he taught me to ride a bike, or how he supported my art even when he didn't understand it. The biology is just biology." After we hung up, I sat in Dad's old lab surrounded by equipment that represented both his legacy and my future. Alex was at his desk across the room, grading papers from his undergraduate genetics course. The space felt peaceful in a way it hadn't since before Dad's death. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from the shock of Dad's unexpected death, to the betrayal of discovering my family's fundamental lies, to the gradual rebuilding of relationships based on choice rather than obligation. It had been painful, devastating at times, but it had also been necessary. The Foundation was thriving. My research was making a real difference in people's lives. My relationship with Olivia was evolving into something more honest and potentially more meaningful than our old sibling dynamic had ever been. And Alex, well, Alex was becoming something I wasn't quite ready to name, but was definitely ready to explore. That night, as we locked up the lab and walked out to our cars, Alex turned to me with a question that had been hanging between us for months. "Emily, would you like to have dinner sometime? Not a working dinner where we discuss grant applications. Just dinner." I looked at this man who'd supported me through the worst crisis of my life, who'd helped me build something beautiful from something broken, who'd shown me what it meant to choose relationships based on respect and genuine affection, rather than biological obligation or social convenience. "I'd love that," I said. "But I should warn you, I come with a pretty complicated family history." He laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him in months. "Emily, after everything we've been through together, I think I can handle complicated." As I drove home that night, I realized that Dad's final gift hadn't been the money, or the house, or even the research equipment. His final gift had been the courage to choose truth over comfort, authentic relationships over convenient lies, and genuine growth over the safety of staying exactly the same. The inheritance had just been the catalyst. The real legacy was learning how to build a life worth living, even when it meant starting over from scratch. You know, when I started telling you this story, I said the biggest twist I ever discovered wasn't in a DNA strand, it was in my own family. But I've realized something in the months since all of this happened. The real discovery wasn't the lies my family had been living. The real discovery was learning the difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose to build. DNA defines our biology. It determines our eye color, our susceptibility to certain diseases, our genetic predispositions. But family, real family, is about choice, truth, and what you're willing to fight for. It's about the people who support your growth even when it's uncomfortable, who tell you hard truths because they love you enough to risk your anger, who show up when your world falls apart and help you rebuild it better than it was before. I'm sitting here in Dad's rebuilt lab, well, our lab now, the Carter Foundation's main research facility. It's better than it ever was before Mom destroyed it. We have equipment Dad could only have dreamed of, owning researchers from universities across the country, collaborating on projects he would have loved, and most importantly, we have families who are benefiting from discoveries that might never have happened if this crisis hadn't forced me to think bigger than just my own research goals. The irony isn't lost on me that Mom's attempt to destroy Dad's legacy actually ended up expanding it beyond anything he could have accomplished in his lifetime. Sometimes, the worst things that happen to us become the catalysts for the best things we end up creating. Last month, we announced our first major breakthrough. The team studying Duchenne muscular dystrophy, the same condition Dad was researching when he died, successfully completed early trials of a gene therapy treatment that could potentially halt the disease's progression. 3 families who've been part of our research program are seeing improvements in their children that doctors said were impossible just 2 years ago. But even more meaningful to me is the work we're doing with families who've experienced genetic revelations, like ours. We've created support networks, counseling resources, and research programs, specifically designed to help people navigate the emotional complexity of learning that their biological relationships aren't what they believe them to be. Through this work, I've met dozens of people whose lives were turned upside down by DNA tests. Some discovered that their fathers weren't their biological parents. Others learned that siblings they'd grown up with were actually half-siblings, or step-siblings, or no relation at all. A few found out about biological siblings they never knew existed. What I've learned from all of these families is that the initial shock and pain are almost universal, but the long-term outcomes depend entirely on how people choose to respond to the truth. Some families are destroyed by these revelations. They fragment into bitter disputes over inheritance, identity, and belonging. But others emerge stronger with relationships built on honest choice, rather than assumed obligation. The families that thrive are the ones that learn what I've learned: biology creates connections, but love creates family. DNA might determine who you're related to, but it doesn't determine who you choose to care about, support, and build a life with. Olivia and I talk every few weeks now. Not as sisters, we were never really sisters, but as friends who happen to share a complicated history. She's thriving in her psychology program, working with a research team that studies family resilience after major revelations. Last month, she published her first academic paper on identity reconstruction, following parental misattribution. It was brilliant, insightful, and deeply personal without being exploitative. She's also completely transformed her relationship with social media. Instead of using it to perform a curated version of her life, she uses it to share resources for people dealing with family crises and identity questions. Her content is more authentic, more helpful, and ironically more popular than her previous lifestyle posts ever were. The trust I established for her education and therapy has become a model for how we support other families through our foundation. We've learned that financial support without emotional support rarely leads to positive outcomes. But when you combine practical resources with therapeutic guidance and community connection, people can rebuild their lives in ways that honor both their past and their future. Mom and I haven't spoken since her sentencing hearing. I know from court documents that she's struggling to make her restitution payments, and part of me feels guilty about that. But I've also learned that guilt over other people's choices isn't the same as responsibility for their consequences. She made decisions that destroyed trust relationships and property. The fact that those decisions have ongoing consequences doesn't make me responsible for fixing them. Alex and I have been dating for about 6 months now, though. Dating feels like an inadequate word for what we're building together. We're partners in every sense, professional, collaborators, emotional supporters, and yes, romantic companions. But we're taking things slowly, both of us having learned that the most meaningful relationships are built on solid foundations rather than dramatic gestures. He's been instrumental in helping the foundation expand beyond what I could have accomplished alone. His expertise in research methodology has improved our grant success rate. His connections in the academic community have brought in collaborators I never could have attracted by myself. And his steady presence has provided the emotional stability I needed to process everything that's happened. More importantly, he's helped me understand that choosing to trust someone after experiencing betrayal isn't naive, it's brave. Learning to distinguish between people who deserve trust and people who don't is one of the most important skills anyone can develop, especially people who've been burned by trusting the wrong people in the past. The foundation now employs 12 full-time researchers, supports graduate students from 6 different universities, and maintains collaborative relationships with research institutions across the country. We've published papers in top-tier journals, received federal grant funding, and most importantly, we've developed treatments that are actually helping families dealing with genetic disorders. But the work I'm most proud of is the Family Support Program. We provide genetic counseling therapy resources, legal guidance, and financial assistance to families navigating complex inheritance issues, paternity questions, and relationship rebuilding after major revelations. It's the kind of comprehensive support that I wish had been available when our family was falling apart. Through this program, I've learned that our story isn't unusual. Families built on lies, secrets, and false assumptions are everywhere. The difference is that some families choose to face the truth and rebuild, while others choose to maintain comfortable illusions, even when those illusions are causing ongoing harm. I pick up the photograph that sits on my desk, Dad and me in his old lab when I was about 12, both of us grinning at the camera while holding up a DNA model we'd built together out of candy and toothpicks. He looks so proud in that picture, not just of our silly science project, but of sharing his passion with someone who genuinely understood and appreciated it. I used to look at this picture and see a father and daughter bonding over shared interests. Now I see something deeper, a man who understood that the most important thing you can give someone isn't biological connection, but genuine respect for who they are and who they're becoming. Dad didn't leave me his inheritance because I was his biological daughter. He left it to me because he trusted me to honor truth over convenience, to choose growth over comfort, to build something meaningful rather than just preserve something familiar. The DNA confirmation was never really about proving biological relationships. It was about ensuring that his legacy went to someone who shared his values, regardless of their genetic connection. I lost my lab, my illusions about family loyalty, and my naive belief that love and biology are the same thing. But I kept my integrity. I kept my commitment to truth. I kept my dedication to work that actually matters. And in the end, that's enough. More than enough, it's everything. The most beautiful discovery I've made through all of this is that you don't have to be trapped by the family you're born into. You can choose to build something better. You can surround yourself with people who support your growth, who value honesty over convenience, who show up when things get difficult, instead of disappearing when relationships require effort. Biology might create connections, but choice creates family. Love might start with feelings, but it's sustained by actions. And legacy isn't about what you inherit. It's about what you build with the resources you're given, regardless of how you acquired them. So, if you're watching this and dealing with your own family crisis, if you've discovered lies or secrets or betrayals that have shattered everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you, I want you to know that the pain you're feeling is real and valid and temporary. The truth might hurt, but lies hurt worse, and they hurt for longer. You have a choice. You can spend your energy trying to force people to be different than they are, or you can spend it building relationships with people who are already the kind of people you want in your life. You can fight to preserve comfortable illusions, or you can embrace uncomfortable truths that lead to genuine growth. Choose truth. Choose growth. Choose the people who choose you back freely and honestly. Choose to build something beautiful from whatever pieces you're left with, even if those pieces look nothing like what you started with. Because in the end, the best revenge against people who've betrayed your trust isn't destroying them. It's becoming so genuinely happy and successful that their opinions become irrelevant. The best response to being undervalued isn't demanding recognition. It's building a life so meaningful that you stop needing external validation. Dad taught me that science is about asking better questions, not just finding comfortable answers. Life, it turns out, works the same way. The question isn't, why did this happen to me? The question is, what am I going to build with what I learned? I chose to build a foundation that helps families research that saves lives and relationships based on mutual respect rather than biological obligation. I chose to transform pain into purpose, betrayal into boundaries, and loss into the freedom to create something entirely new. What are you going to choose to build? If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had your own family secrets that changed everything, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about family drama, unexpected revelations, and people rebuilding their lives after betrayal, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.